Good evening. My name is Aleš Ernitzel. I'm currently also running for the president uh, of the Republic of Slovenia, but that's not the most important part. I'm also a philosopher and a podcaster. That is what I am more than I'm a candidate. And tonight, my guests are very interesting guests and very important guests, in my opinion. My old friend under the pseudonym Husar, we made a stream um, on my previous channel, the God Erased, and his two friends from South Africa. They are farmers from South Africa, and tonight's stream will be mostly about the conditions of white farmers. You are called Boers, if I may say so, in South Africa towards the black um, globalist government. So, dear guests, Tiwi, Johannes, and Husar, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to my live stream.
Thank you so much for having us, and to all of our friends in Slovenia. We are in the same struggle. We have people in government who do not represent us, and I think in Slovenia it makes sense to get involved at least in the political process because you can get some good results in that situation. There are countries in Europe where if you use the political system, it's actually possible to get some good results. However, in South Africa, for white people, we're past that point, and there is no workable system under the South African democracy, and South African whites will never actually have any representation under the current setup. So we have to actually start working towards our own nation state outside of the current order. And yeah, I think Tirvi and Johannes have very important insights about the land issue in South Africa. So maybe that could be one of the first things we could begin talking about tonight.
Yeah, great, Tiwi, Johannes. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for coming. You guys are probably also very brave to speak out. It's probably also a bit dangerous to speak out so upfrontly in South Africa, isn't it?
Yes. So I think I'll just firstly introduce myself, and then Davy can introduce himself. So my name is Johannes Achenbach, and I am a farmer from South Africa. Mm, On both of my parents' side, we come from strictly farming backgrounds, and we've got a very rich history in this folk specifically, in partaking in the freedom struggles and stuff from my family background. So, I grew up with this very strong nationalistic sentiment, and I grew up during the so-called Rainbow Nation era, where whites were being ostracized and shunned and shoved out of every sector of society, and we were always told that we should just be quiet and accept what is being done to us. And I think this prompted a response to want myself to get involved with politics. I was actually also, headed to Parliament for the Vryheidsfront Plus, invited me there in 2016. Um, but as you learn with knowledge, you start to understand certain things, and the one thing that I took away from the experience was that the people that still cling to politics as a solution in South Africa are ones that do so for self gain, and they will change your zeal for your people. They will absolutely, how do you say it, kill it, and they will make you docile. So for us, there's no hiding. I and my brother and I had this conversation the other day, and when there's nowhere left to hide, you stop hiding. You know, and that's where we are now. It's no point in hiding. Our future is under attack. Our race, and I'll quickly finish by just saying this: this country of South Africa, borders didn't always look like it does now, and it at one point was a exclusively white country, just like Europe is a white continent and is now being invaded by non whites. And that's why I think it's extremely important that Europeans listen to what we have to say, because South Africa has always been the playbook for what they will implement in in other Western and white countries. So please pay very special attention to this message. It is very important because once your country has been stolen from you, then the rules change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Kiwi,
good evening, guys.
good
Good
evening.
evening, Alice. Thanks for having us, and I want to extend my greetings to our audience that are watching this live and that will also watch this in a later. Yeah, first, my name is Stevie Wessels. I'm a Boer. Actually, that is literally a farmer in English. So the name Boer is direct. We are being called Boers because we are traditionally, all of us were farmers once upon a time, and that has greatly changed over the years. And I think that is a thing that is very sad. Our race has lost its roots, as has our Boer folk. Once upon a time, we were close to 90% of us before the Anglo-Boer War was farmers or Boere. And today we are about 4 million and we have less than 27,000. The newest numbers are less than 27,000 farmers, white farmers that are actually participating in agriculture. So yeah, that is just a bit of insight so you guys can better understand currently what's happening in South Africa. So yeah, that's my story, and I'm a farmer. I mainly farm with cattle. A few years ago, I also planted crops, but in the meantime, I have ceased to do that since there is not enough profit in that. So now I'm mainly farming with cattle, and my sheep I've sold as well because of crime. In South Africa, crime is rampant, and stock theft is in my region extremely huge or a very huge problem. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to ask you guys, perhaps you, Husar, but all of you three guys, to explain to Slovene or to ex-Yugoslav or to European or to American normie that probably knows the story of a righteous fighter for blacks' rights, Nelson Mandela, and this story about South Africa, and this is everything he knows. First of all, you mentioned Anglo-Boer War. I would really like for you guys to explain what that war was all about, and um, perhaps tell our audience what's your view of the so-called apartheid era of South Africa and the relationship between blacks and whites in South Africa. So the non-Hollywood interpretation of it.
Yeah, so that's quite a big question, but we can get into it. So, to put it in a nutshell, uh, historically, the farmers in the Western Cape Colony got extremely abused by their colonial masters, and they decided that, for example, through taxation, through driving down their language, and they went on this big migration out of the colony. So they actually said goodbye to colonialism and they moved with their families into uncharted territory, and they set up, in the end, a few republics, the largest being the Orange Free State and the Transvaal republics, and there people had liberty. And like Tivi was saying, the God-given future for a person in that state was to be a farmer. So those people cared more about agricultural matters. They didn't care for stones that came out of the ground. And unfortunately, gold was discovered, and once gold and diamonds were discovered in very large numbers in South Africa, all of a sudden we had capitalists streaming into the Boer republics. And as their numbers grew, they set up whole towns like Johannesburg. Johannesburg basically became a foreigner's town where there were no Boers living in the town. Maybe there were some magistrates and people working in some official clerk positions, but the majority of people in a place like Johannesburg were Jews and maybe some Anglos who were coming to work in the mines. And they worked towards establishing their power in South Africa by getting the British Empire to provoke a war against the Boer republics. Britain actually really just wanted to fight a war against the Transvaal Republic in the beginning, but of course the Transvaal Republic and the Orange Free State were joined at the hip. They were the same people, they had the same dreams, and even the chief rabbi Hertz of South Africa, we actually had a chief rabbi in South Africa, he was beating the drum for war, and he was calling for democracy rights. That's how they framed it. Democracy rights for mine owners in South Africa. And basically, to put it along in a nutshell, unfortunately, South Africa lost the Boer republics. And maybe I could just hand it to Tivi and Johannes if you guys want to add anything more about that. Maybe you guys can mention about the camps of death and the great destruction of property by the British against the Boers.
Devi, do you want to take the question, or how should we compartmentalize it?
I think you can go first, Johannes.
Okay, so it's very interesting, because a lot of people in South Africa today try to. So I firmly believe that we are in the era of identity politics, and more so specifically, we are in racial identity politics, right? So today, people are trying to reshape our understanding of history, right? So, firstly, we have to understand why the wars took place, as Hassar just explained. But ultimately, yes, they wanted what we had, but we have to talk to why we were willing to fight. The reason why the Boers were willing to fight is because the majority of Boers, like Devi said, lived on the rural countryside. I mean, even after um, the scorched earth policy in 1911, there was 600,000 white people living on the countryside, which was 48% of the total population. Now, this is astounding because this is just after all the farms and the majority of farmland had been destroyed by the British in the Second Anglo-Boer War. So people were willing to fight because they owned something. They were free, they lived free, and they were part of a community. They knew their neighbors and so on. So it's actually interesting, this Jameson raid that took place to try and kickstart the Second Anglo-Boer War, if I'm not mistaken, was done by Cecil John Rhodes. And years later, in 1970, August, at the University of Grahamstown in South Africa, Harry Oppenheimer, which is a Jew, or was a Jew, from South Africa, and his family still owns the majority of mining interests and companies, as well as the most arable agricultural land in South Africa. I was at a conference the other day where Kumba greeted us as saying, we are the owners of the most arable agricultural land in South Africa, right? So he said that Cecil John Rhodes was correct in trying to destroy the Boers from Transvaal because they were too proud of who they were as a people, and they were too suspicious of foreigners, and that they would never be able to form a part of the future that they had planned not only for South Africa but for the rest of the world, which is a multi-racial future. So that is why, I know it's sort of all over the place what I'm explaining here, but that is why it is so important to look at our situation in South Africa for you guys in the other Western countries, because we are the blueprint for their attack plan against white identity. And they first forced this war in which they drummed up international support against us, and they cut off all the majority of foreign support for the Boers. And when they couldn't beat us, they threw our women and children into camps and they starved us, and they went to the cowards and the capitulators, and they turned our own people against us. And now, today, they are redefining our identity, redefining what it means to be a Boer and what it means to be a Afrikaner. They are essentially convoluting it to the point where they are saying that even a black can be part of our people as long as he speaks our language, believes in our God, and practices our culture. So, very, very important whenever you aim or have any political aspirations, it must be done on the basis of something that is measurable, that is concrete, and that can't change, such as race. So yeah, that's my part.
Yeah, friend Horn asked a question. Bob Nielsen answered a bit, but I would also like to hear your take on it. Are South African white non-farmers, white from urban areas, on the side with the farmers, or are they supporting the government? And this is, I would also like to make this question a little bit broader. Are there, besides this racial antagonisms, are there also ethnical or class antagonisms in South Africa?
Yeah, I will take this answer. The main thing we have to realize in South Africa's moment at this moment is poverty is rampant amongst whites. I really have to tell you, I personally work with our cause, and everywhere you look especially in the big cities, yeah, it's a big problem. You will always hear the lie that 70% of South Africa's economy is still owned by whites. Now, I want to make something clear. Yes, before 1994, it may have been so. A large portion of South Africa's economy was owned by whites, but that changed hands in the last few years. Now, the economy is owned by a few that appears whites. So, yeah, the main thing I want to say to answer this question is everywhere in the world, you have people that are liberally minded and that are against our cause. And then you have a large percentage, and that's probably everywhere in the world. In South Africa is no exception, that actually realize we are in big trouble, but they are not willing to stand up for what's righteous. So I can literally the most or a large number of people in South Africa are aware of the Jewish question. They are aware that we are in big trouble. They are aware that things need to change, but they are not willing to stand up at this moment. For various reasons. Some have lost everything due to poverty. So the only thing they are worrying about is where will their next meal come from. Others do not want to risk their business interest or then so they might lose money, especially in South Africa. So if you are pro-white and you came out publicly and say I am only standing for my own people, that will that can cause a big problem for you, especially in if you have a big business. So me and Johannes, which are actually farmers, we are a bit better off in that department. So yeah, in South Africa, there are a lot of people that actually do realize what the problems are, but they can't do nothing about it, or that is at least how they feel. It's the same. I want to call them. You can call them sheeple, you can call them lemmings, whatever you want. They will actually unite with our cause if the time is right and if they believe we will win. But at this moment, apathy, they feel apathy and they realize what the problem is, but they do not want to join the fight. And it's up to us, a few men. And there's a lot of men currently waking up and that are realizing they need to do something and get actually actively involved. And I believe it's up to us to make these people realize that are still undecided on what action to take, that they need to realize they need to get involved. And that's everywhere in the world. And yeah, of course, there are a lot of farmers, currently farmers, we call them mega boere, they're extremely rich farmers that have a lot of land. They are aiding the government and they're aiding the people. And yeah, that there is people like that. They are a smaller percentage than the percentage I will call them conservative, just conservative, maybe just a little bit. uh, That people are still a huge block that actually feel a lot for being actively involved.
I, Kiwi, I can't hear you.
I think he's
Can
just
you?
put his mic on mute.
Yeah,
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 you.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, weren't able to hear you for a couple of seconds.
So I'll just say, like, my background is very different in a sense to TV and Johannes. Like, my first language was English at school, and language has also been a problem in South Africa. South Africa became actually a republic in 1961 under probably our greatest president, Hendrik Verwoerd. And Hendrik Verwoerd basically wanted to work for white people to be unified and to see themselves as Afrikaners. But in my opinion, the apartheid government were not strong enough on forcing Afrikaans to be really the first language of all white people in South Africa. So they kept separate schools. And as a boy growing up, I remember we used to compete in sports against other schools and who other schools where Afrikaans was the first language, and there was still like this animosity because of the Boer War and all the crimes the Anglos had committed. And I think in the future, we English speaking South Africans really need to like look at the political landscape very carefully and realize that English speaking South Africans haven't created some special culture by themselves. They've largely been adopting culture from the English, from Americans, from Australians, from New Zealanders, and maybe it's intentional that whites who speak English as their first language have been put on this course, and they haven't actually integrated into speaking Afrikaans completely. There's still like a division, and I would say that maybe the English speaking people are less concerned about the farmers than people who speak Afrikaans. Like, that's my observation.
So a couple of days ago, I believe it was you, Hussar, that published that meme that made fun of the dichotomy right left, conservative liberal, or progressive, and so forth. Is it in South Africa the same, that the mainstream politics is about somewhat of downstream from American model of politics, and they're basically, and then all the politicians are basically bots.
Yeah, I
Um,
think. Yep. Go ahead, Johannes.
I would love to answer this question because, as I have a little bit of experience in it. So, when I was studying in university, I met one of the leaders, party leaders of the most conservative or right wing political party, as they claim, right? Um, and he invited me to parliament. And we went to the parliament sitting. I was a guest in the gallery, listened to it all, had lunch with the three top leaders in the Vryheidsfront Plus, which is the Freedom Front Plus. Um, and afterwards, we went to this dining area, or however you would call it, a cafe maybe, to drink some coffee and tea. And it was the weirdest thing for me, um, because this leader, this supposed leader of this conservative right wing group, was greeting the black communists of the ANC and the DA and all his opposition parties. He was shaking their hands. And I sat there and I thought to myself, if this is what fighting for your people looks like, there is no hope. There is literally no hope. And you will find it very interesting, Alice, that in South Africa, the biggest opposition that people like Thierry, myself, and Uzar have come from the conservative bloc because they do not want a change in the status quo. They want it to stay the same because this way they get to keep what they have. And we are the ones that suffer as a consequence of it. The poorer people are suffering tremendously, and these people are not they are not bothered to undercut their own and undermine their own people to work with blacks, but they will not how do you say, unify around racial identity. They only want to talk about ideas such as liberalism,
Yeah.
libertarianism, conservatism, and all of that stuff is nonsense. The only thing that gives life to an idea is the people who created this idea and that maintain this idea. And multiracialism maintains nothing. It essentially is a destruction in and of itself.
Yeah, we have similar problems here in Slovenia and probably all over the Western world. We People buy into these foreign ideologies as progressivism, Marxism, liberalism, conservatism. These are all foreign Jewish, basically, ideas, and they just cannot grasp that politics should be around your people's interest. But first you have to have your own people. You have to choose your own people, and then answers to questions of what is best for your people will give you your politically ideological answers. Your ideology should be about your people's interest, not about first about some foreign ideologies, as in you have to have free markets, you have to have free trade, and so forth. Yeah, maybe, but it depends with whom, when, what's the cost for our people to do that, and so forth and so forth. And this is basically what conservatism in South Africa is probably also about, isn't it?
Do you want one of you guys want to take the question, or should
Uh,
I?
Oh,
I just want to maybe mention what happened on the 25th of August. There was a court case ruling. There is a party in South Africa called the EFF, which are in rhetoric even more radical than the ANC. And to be honest, Julius Malema, the leader of this party, he was in the ANC Youth League, and he set up this party. And they even have parliament members now that they're increasing in influence. And basically, they're probably just used by the ANC to push agendas which may not be really legal in South Africa, or the optics are so bad it should be illegal. And Julius Malema regularly sings songs about and says, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, we must slit the throat of whiteness. And there's this conservative group for minorities in South Africa called AfroForum. And AfroForum tried to do a hate speech case against them. Now, hate speech in the first sense, it's a very Jewish tactic at trying to silence your opponents. When a group of people say, kill the Boer, kill the farmer. You need to think about that statement really as a declaration of war against your own race. This guy is calling for the execution of our people. And how does like the conservative group respond? They try to win a court ruling against this man. So they're really out of touch with reality. The tools that they're trying to work with are the tools that the enemy has created. And for your audience, they're probably going to laugh, but the court ruled that hate speech was not spoken. So they voted. Yeah, the result was that singing basically a war song is not hate speech, and these are the tactics that the organizations in South Africa employ, the conservative organizations, and they don't have any vision for where we're going to, and they don't have any tools for getting us out of this mess. And for us here tonight, we have realized that the Rainbow Project, there is no hope in it. We can't manage it, we can't work within it, and it's going to lead to our group death. And this is the reason why we're so passionate to speak about this, because we want a future for our children. We had the Boer republics, and we want something like that in the future. And this current state, it's unacceptable to us.
Yep.
Yeah, and
Sorry. Go on. Sorry.
I mean, something that I can point out, Mark Oppenheimer was the legal counsel for Africa. He was their attorney, and he is a Jew, and he is also a family of the famous Oppenheimers, which is in South Africa. So yeah, that will obviously set off alarms lights, and also putting Afriforum specifically all minority groups and for all minorities, and also
Just a minute. I really can't hear you well. What about you guys? What about Husar and Johannes? Do you hear Tiwi well?
can you hear me now? Can you hear me? My reception is a bit bad.
We can hear you now, yes.
Yeah, now we hear you. Yeah.
The last thing you said were about minorities, yeah? Afroforum representing minorities.
They are representing minorities. Also, that we should stand with each other on the basis of culture and race. If a black man were to spoke Afrikaans and adopt our culture, he can stand with us as a brother. And I believe that is quite a liberal thought, and it's a thought that is currently voiced amongst most groups in Europe. Yeah, and also amongst Trump supporters, it is quite very different. Afriforum are also supposed to be conservative, supposedly conservative action, human rights action groups. So yeah, it just to sum it up, this court case was just for the show. I believe it isn't all negative for us. A lot of people realize we need to do something, and the courts will not do it in fact. By the way, Black Dutch and South Africa, and most courts have judges. They will not rule in your favor. But people realize going to the courts and petitioning the government, starting protests, peaceful protests, not solve the issue. So they realize they will need to do something. So this court case isn't all bad, although we have to, of course, it will incite more violence against the white population in South Africa. And yeah, that's a sad thing in a lot of ways. But I believe the only thing we can do at this moment is to try and defend yourself best you can. Not in South Africa, you can still firearms. And yeah, you should look after your own security. And unfortunately, a lot of South Africans, white South Africans, are still lacking. They believe that you can go outside at night without a firearm.
Do you guys have any idea how to get past all the obstacles when you try to organize yourselves. I mean, with all the Jewish capital power, all the Jewish media power, all the Jewish power on courts, your own traders. I mean, in Slovenia, it's almost impossible to organize as a ethno nationalistic party, as a party of Slovenes. I'm currently running for president, which is kind of absurd. I don't have any chances, but I wanted to do that because I saw that none of the candidates is able or willing to say that Slovenia is a country of Slovenes, where Slovenes have privileges they don't have anywhere else in the world. For example, um, we don't have so many racial problems here, but we have ethnical problems. For example, we have so many Bosniaks and Kosovo Albanians coming here, which have better demographics than Slovenes, and the Conservative Party, the so-called Conservative parties, basically say we cannot do anything. It's what we have to do, so our companies can compete with German markets or whatever. So they're willing to sell their own nation. They're willing for their nation to die out for the better GDP. Uh,
Well, sorry, if I could
yeah,
take this
go.
question.
Yeah, yeah,
So, I don't think that we could disclose exactly our strategies, but what I will say is that it sounds to me like in your country, just like ours, our enemies run off three pillars when it comes to politics. The first is the state, right, which will be the governing party. The second one will be the church, because they have to subvert the church and control the church in order to manipulate public opinion. And then thirdly, it's the economy. So then they will always sort of balance their arguments off of these three. So they'll tell you it is not, if say for instance your country is Christian, it is not good of a Christian to want to do what you're suggesting, others. It is not good for the economy what you are suggesting, others. It is against the
yeah,
law what you are suggesting. So they'll try and deter you from these things. But in the end of the day, if we hope to inspire any direction in our people, we cannot do it by repeating the same phrases as our enemies that enslave us repeats. Because when they speak of economy, right, they speak of an exclusive economy, an economy exclusive to their own clique, political clique, this international clique that they have. So, what is the one thing that what is their disadvantage? They have to lie. They have to lie because what they believe in is a lie. And a lie has no intrinsic value, but the truth has intrinsic value. Secondly, even though they have, like AfriForum, for instance, have insurmountable amount of access to capital and money. But what they do not have is they do not have the truth and they do not have the people. So, what I mean by this is because they represent and fight only for this small interest group, that is the sum total of their allegiance, right? And yes, people will believe in them for as long as there is consequences and stuff like that. But if you and if we manage to inspire hope, will to action, then they are in the minority and they will always be in the minority because we stand for the people in our countries. We stand for justice for our people. And therefore, we will never be a minority. Therefore, we will always have the advantage, even if everything is pitted against us. So the best strategy there is to simply tell the truth and to show the people what direction you want to take your country and your countrymen in.
yeah. Thank you. There was an interesting question from Ambam. Okay, there's two-sided question. Why don't you whites move back to Europe? That's one question, and the other question was, um, why are all the blacks in South Africa the same, or are there any blacks that could be considered as sympathetic to your cause? Perhaps first this last question.
Uh, do
Any
you
one
want
of
me
you
to answer
guys?
it or?
Yeah, any one of you guys.
Johannes, you want to answer this question? I know. You go first.
I do want to answer this question. Do you want to take the one about the black allegiances, maybe, TV? And then I'll
Yeah,
do the one about why are we still in South Africa?
yeah, I'll do that.
Oh, he wants to first. He wants to first ask if there are any black allegiances in South Africa possible, and what we think about that. Right, Alus.
Yeah. Are there any?
So, TV, you're first. You're first.
Laat vaai manne asseblief.
I don't know if TV's maybe having lag.
Okay,
So,
so you go ahead, Johannes.
yeah, I'll do my part, and then maybe he's back to answer that
Yeah.
question for
Okay.
you. So, okay. So the question that he's asking is why don't whites move back to Europe and help us to exterminate other races? Well, it is simple. Because white people fled to South Africa in pursuit of freedom. White people fled to America in pursuit of freedom. And there is no future in capitulation. If you want a future, you have to be willing to fight for it, right? And we are the indicators of what will happen to Western civilization. For instance, think about it this way. Let's just put it into a different perspective. We are roughly 7% of the population in South Africa as white people, right? Roughly speaking. If you look at global population, white people in the world are roughly 7% of the global population. You see? So if they manage to craft their political system in a way that we, at the climax of this battle, decide to pack up and leave everyone that can, then it means that we have become so individualistic, so devoid of honor and integrity that we would, for our own sake, leave everybody that can't leave in this country behind to be slaughtered by the blacks. And that is not who we are. That is not what we believe in. You know, I had a speech at a big rally here in South Africa for the Day of the Vow, and I contemplated this thing very much. You know, I asked myself, why is it that white people are still in South Africa? And when I see how many people, how many of my countrymen, whether they be in America, whether they be in Europe, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, have a yearning to return back to South Africa and to their fatherland. It shows me that even though we are divided at this point in time, we are united in our longing to be free. And the reason why we are united in our longing to be free is because our fatherland lives within us. And it is calling to its children, telling them to return and to fight for our people and to fight for justice. So we will never leave South Africa because this country was bought and paid for by the blood of our martyrs. And therefore, even if we should all die, we will not leave South Africa under any circumstances ever.
Great. That's the true spirit we would like to have in Slovenia too. Or how many people exactly are there willing to fight for your cause, that hear your words and are motivated by your words, similarly as I got motivated right now just hearing from you. How many people are currently willing to fight for your cause?
Well, words alone are not going to inspire people to fight in South Africa, but how many people feel the exact same as we do? The majority of white people at this point. What will bring them, according to my estimation, to a willingness to fight is if we, as if we, myself, TV, Usar, and some individuals collectivize, organize, and start fighting back in our respective ways, um, and this is unifying our people ideologically firstly, because unity in resistance is, or in struggle, is the very first step, and that's the thing that we have to achieve first. So um, what we are seeing is we did a show, not a show, but we supported some white children at Hoërskool Rustenburg, where they sang Erika and they did the Roman salute, and the Jewish Board of Deputies attacked them, and we reached the national newspapers because we went to the school and we sang the song in support of them. We did a speech, we did some flying of insignia and stuff like that, and it was funny because even on the liberal platforms they had to delete the comments that supported us because there was two-thirds support for what we did. Even in the most liberal mindset, people are supporting what we do, because everybody is tired of the Rainbow Nation. The one thing the Jews do very well is they say, how are you going to achieve apartheid? How are you going to achieve racial separation? It is so simple. It doesn't need to be achieved. The only thing that needs to be enforced is racial integration. Separation is the most natural thing there is entirely. So, but I see
Yeah,
TV is back, so
I agree. But I know that this is a Jewish narrative. But what is this Jewish narrative that speaks pejoratively about the era of apartheid? Is it only about Nelson Mandela, or what were your predecessors supposedly have done wrong in this era, or were these your predecessors, or the apartheid government? Who were these people?
So
This is
many. Okay, go ahead, TV.
oh, thanks. Okay, I think you can. Yeah, you can chip in afterwards. The main thing we need to realize here is it's in very easy answer: leadership. Leadership and our leaders in South Africa was subverted after Hendrik Verwoerd was assassinated in '66. Um, all our leaders from the National Party, in its essence, when it was in its beginning years and in the early '60s, was a good was for their people. It was a nationalistic party for the white citizens of South Africa. But that all changed. They were subverted, and little by little, they subverted us, and they broken us down, and they made us ready for the handover. And it's not a handover of power, because I always say power didn't really change hands. The ANC government is just a proxy government. That's a proxy power for the Jews at this moment. So yeah, it's easy. Leaders. And in South Africa, we have this thing: when you are a national party, you will die a member of the national party. Doesn't matter what the leaders do. We're extremely loyal to our leaders, to our churches. And the churches was extremely subversive for our people. They were the first to call apartheid a sin against humanity, a crime against humanity, and called it a sin. So yeah, leadership, and our leaders were subverted. Usar, you can chip in. I think you have some very good points to add here. I know you're well versed on this subject.
Yeah, so our government, the apartheid government, they had the idea of separate development. For the audience who maybe don't know, separate development was the idea that there would be schools for whites only, and then there would be schools for the other races. There would be beaches for whites only, and then there would be places where black people would be restricted from going to. And this was all in the dream of maintaining the race. As soon as you're going to have integration with people going to the same school, well, first of all, your daughters are going to be harassed by black students. Your your children who are going to try study in the classroom, they're going to be dragged down by blacks who have lower IQs. The apartheid government, they understood that blacks didn't have the same civilizational capabilities as white people. They understood that the IQ wasn't the same. So apartheid was actually a great idea. And someone asked, like, when was it established? It actually existed. There were laws before the apartheid government. There were racial exclusionary laws, and Jews and liberal Anglos were always trying to break down those laws in South Africa. But it became institutionalized in 1948. And the concept was very nice, but instead of like apartheid having an end goal where white people would again have their complete freedom, their complete nation state, they worked at giving white tax to the black homelands. They set up regions in South Africa where blacks would exclusively live, but white taxpayers would fund their hospitals. And under the system, blacks exploded as a population group. Their numbers like grew rapidly, and the apartheid government was actually responsible for that massive increase. I listened to a great talk yesterday with Tivi and Krusty on Martinez's perspective, and Tivi was speaking about how the whites in South Africa produce most of the food. And, if whites had their own nation and they weren't providing blacks with food, the black population would very quickly fall into starvation, and you'd have like millions of black people dying. So we carried this black burden, and I think it was informed by maybe people who were sincerely Christian, and they knew that there were racial differences, but they still felt it was their duty to raise these people. And I believe empathy for our enemies is a great sin that white people continue to follow in. And do you want me to say anything more about Nelson Mandela, or?
Yeah. Please, only one question, so that I don't forget it. How much, um, how much is here? How much are your churches involved in this, in creation of this psychological, sociological burden, the empathy towards your enemies? As you articulated it.
Yeah, this is a question for Johannes or Tivi.
Okay, maybe you go on about Nelson Mandela, and then Johannes and TV can go on about the fault of your churches.
Yeah, so many people want to know like why Nelson Mandela was put into prison, and they may not know the backstory, but the ANC was set up as a liberation movement for blacks, and instead of like wanting their own nation state where they could be their own people, they wanted to parasite off white people. And we see this in Europe as well. The foreign races come to our lands and they parasite off us. Nelson Mandela, he became a prominent leader in the ANC, and then he set up an organization which was the brainchild of Jews, called in Konto Wesizwe, which means like spear of the nation. And there was a massive arrest of these people. By the way, this organization, they advocated for a violent revolution against the white government, and they were willing to use terrorism to achieve their political goals. It was basically just a branch of the ANC, which didn't officially claim this was what they wanted. And they were engaging in civilian attacks. They were targeting civilians. There were bombs. They were destroying electricity stations, going after pylons. So they were a terrorist organization, and Nelson Mandela was the leader of that organization. There was a trial called the Rivonia trial, and they were all found guilty. And so liberals who think Nelson Mandela is the greatest man, he was literally a Marxist terrorist, and he was found guilty. So there's no love here for that man among us.
A little interesting side story. One of Mandela's grandsons actually asked him one time, Granddad, why do you greet this white man that visited us the other day so friendly? Why was you so friendly with him? And Nelson Mandela replied, he's not white, he's a Jew. So yeah, the Jew hated the ANC government.
Yeah, of
And
course.
I
example.
remember. I remember as a boy when the ANC was on television, there would sometimes be these guys who had like white skin, and I was so confused. Like, who are these people? I wasn't even aware of politics, but I instinctually knew like, why is there a white man sympathizing with black people? I was just a small boy, and later on, I came to find out that all those people who I'd seen next to ANC members, they were Jews, all of
Fellow
them.
white, fellow white people, as the as the meme
Fellow
goes.
whites. Exactly.
Fellow whites,
Well,
yeah.
if I could quickly add something, I think it's very important to understand for the European people that maybe have a little bit of not understanding why Mandela became a phenomenon in the first place. So you know the English and the Jews brought in, after the Anglo-Boer War, the second one, 200,000 blacks to come and work on the mines in South Africa. So this is what they did. They started this problem with immigration. So if things continue the way that they are continuing now, then Germany will have a Nelson Mandela figure. Britain is probably the next election away from having a Nelson Mandela, and so all of the different countries will follow suit. Nelson Mandela was a phenomenon created purely artificially. He is not. He is not. Um, the reason why they can use him for something so fraudulent as unifying all the races is because um, his very existence was conjured, if you know what I mean, politically.
Mm,
So it's just an interesting thing.
yeah, thank you. Uh, just a minute. Yeah, are there any defensive paramilitary formations in South Africa? Guys?
Heavy. Okay. Yeah, it's. I don't want to always just answer, but I'll take this one then. Maybe afterwards, Stevie can answer the thing about the churches and the black allies. I think it's a question that he would enjoy. But there are, how do you say? I think that in that sense, the private security is the strongest thing that there is, to oppose the black majority. But the problem is, it is owned by Jews almost entirely. Even if it's not owned by them, the people that do have these companies are more sympathetic to the Jewish mindset and to the capitalist mindset than what they would be
Yeah.
towards the idea of freedom and a folk state. And the paramilitary organizations that there are in South Africa um, are honestly a laughing stock, if I'm going to be honest.
Hannes, it would be interesting maybe if you spoke about the Avia beer for the audience, and maybe what happened in the run up to 94.
Well, that's interesting.
Please.
Yes. So the Avia beer, the problem with the Avia beer was again leadership. So a lot of the guys, like the leadership of the Avia beer, was still subservient to the greater leadership in that they did not want to act against their own leaders. You know, they, like for instance, Eugene Terblanche had a huge following in South Africa, and he totally had the opportunity to, give Rolf Meyer, which was one of the men that signed away our country, his just demise when they stormed the building. They had all of them at gunpoint, literally. And then what did he do? when he had them all at gunpoint, and I'm telling you, his people were willing to act to do what needed to be done, so to speak. But they didn't follow through because, for some reason, they didn't have this conviction. And this is why we lost ultimately, because the ANC were in our country blowing up people. My own grandmother and her mother was almost blown up by Nelson Mandela in the Church Street bombings. They were driving with the car and it happened a couple of meters away from them. They were, thank God, not hurt, but unfortunately, other people grandmother died on that day, and brothers and sisters and so on. My people died that day. um, you juxtapose that, and the RVB were always saying, we threaten with, we will use violence if this, we will use violence if that, but they never use violence, and that is why they lost.
Yeah, and Marxists. Do you know perhaps who are the theoreticians behind the Mandela type of Marxism? He probably got some knowledge from some other people to do that. What's his history, or did he learn about this? Was he recruited by someone, or do you understand what I'm asking? What
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, there's a long history of white South African leaders who actually get schooled in Cambridge. And this could be, for example, like Jan Smuts, one of the first traitorous presidents of South Africa to lead white South Africans to fight against their brothers, Germany, in the First World War and Second World War. Mandela also received tutelage there. So did Thabo Mbeki, which was another president. So there seems to be like a big connection there. Cambridge University. Military training. Mandela actually, and I can send you the Guardian article that covers this. Mandela even received a military training by Mossad. Okay, in Israel. And one of the jobs that Mandela had as the leader of this militant terrorist group was going around the world to collect money. So, like communists in other countries would organize like a meeting, a meet and greet. Mandela would give a speech of liberation, and then he would say, "Give us money." And basically, he was a fundraiser for the spear of the nation, and eventually like the apartheid government caught on to what he was doing. But yeah, he was a self-proclaimed Marxist. And to the audience, just know that actually in South Africa there's a coalition government in power right now. The ANC, the blacks, they don't just rule by themselves, they're in coalition with a communist party in South Africa. So we literally have like a communist coalition government in South Africa. And Marxism is certainly part of the tradition that blacks have been put on the path to follow by the Marxists.
part of the Mossad tradition. It's
That's right. Every single time.
every single time, yeah. And some people still don't see it, but it's not all of them. Although it's all of them. It's
Well,
communists, it's liberals, it's capitalists, it's socialists. What are the relationships between this so-called Marxist communists in South Africa and the so-called capitalists, conservatives, and so forth? Do they seem antagonistic towards each other, and they work with each other behind the lines, or
it's difficult question to answer, but I believe that they don't bother with each other as long as each one gets his cut of the pie. So, in my mind, they are responsible for their respective group that they have to control. So, in the Afrikaner or the Boer um, segment of population, you have certain people, and they will take control of these people, and the blacks, there will be people that take control of them. And as long as they stay in those lanes, then they won't be antagonistic towards each other. I mean, you'll find this very interesting, but Nelson Mandela was actually trained by the apartheid government themselves for how many years, you know? So that's why, like TV said previously, the apartheid government didn't, they just rebranded. They just rebranded. It's still the same clique of people that are ruling and subjugating the Boers in their own home country, you know? Um, but I would like Tevi to answer, maybe if he wants to, the question about the black allegiance. And I want to maybe say something from myself about, what's happening in South Africa with the Zulus right now, because I think it's an important question.
Yeah, it is an important question. You're right. And yeah, and the first thing we need to realize is this is exactly the narrative at this moment that is being pushed in South Africa and everywhere in the world. If it's in the United States, yeah, it's in Europe. We need to the conservative bloc, if the so-called conservative bloc always push this message. We can just look at Candace Owens. They're busy setting her up as the next president of the United States, in my opinion. But they will always say we need to identify blacks that sympathize with our cause and our plight, and we need to pull them in because there is strength in numbers, there is strength in unity. And I can tell you now, this is one of the most destructive thoughts that you can ever have, and it goes against every law of nature. The moment we can take for instance a hyena and a lion. If the lion were to bring in the hyenas and I should work with them, it will destroy the lions. They never work together, and it's the same with the blacks and the whites. So you cannot identify good per se, so-called good blacks to come and work with you, and they will want to marry with your daughters because you will say they are your equals. You have no choice but to say that because that is what the democracy is. That is what being conservatives or a liberal means. If you're a conservative, you are basically saying that you are equal to blacks, but you personally don't want to live among them. But you will tell the world that you are equal. So if next of you will marry your daughter, and you will can say nothing about that because he is your ally and you are leaning on his strength. And I think that's one of the biggest Jewish narratives, and also in South Africa at this moment. They will always pull in a lot of blacks to the marches against farm murders, anything. They will pull in blacks, and these blacks actually are one of the most dividing factors currently in South Africa because they are these friendly blacks. They will always say, we stand for the white farmers, we're against white farm murders, and they will march thousands of kilometers. And when you look at who fund these blacks, you'll find it's Jews like Rope Airsoft. For instance, which are a Jew which started one of the biggest movement in South Africa, which is against farm murders. So yeah, they literally planned them in our midst to subvert us, to take our unity away from us. Because I'm telling you now, if a black is to arrive at a function where I am at, I will not allow him to speak. And there will be whites who will actually stand up against me. And in the end, we will fight amongst each other over should this black be able to speak? Should he get a turn? And we will all forget about the real cause why we were at first and the first thing for this meeting. So yeah, I hope sums it up a bit.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Also, is there a legal framework to have white exclusive businesses, things like housing, schools, restaurants, gyms, etc.?
No, no. Actually, they will shut you down. I tried to open one the other day, but you can use loopholes. But if you say it's exclusively for white people, it's against the law. But if you won't mind me adding something, about that specific thing that David just mentioned, a lot of people want us, white leaders, want us to work together with the Zulus right now. because the Zulus are this proud nation, yada yada yada. Okay. Um, and recently, the or yeah, I think recently. Sorry for my bad English. The
No
Zulu
problem.
king he died. Okay, Goodwill Zwelithini he died, and now his throne needs to be followed up by another Zulu. So the next in line was his daughter to follow him. So know this. The next thing I want to talk about is in England. Do you remember when Prince Harry married a mulatto? In South Africa, Harry married what's her name, Meghan Markle. She's not white, right? So then in South Africa, our media was pushing, saying the royal crown is setting the stage for a new era in existence. One where we will be blind to race. One where the old things and what we cherished in the past will disappear. Okay, so why this is important is because the crown usually work with tribal leaders in South Africa. They usually work with the kings in South Africa. And now there's this article about a white woman from Pretoria, I think, or Johannesburg, that wants to marry this Zulu follow-up king. But what is interesting about this is I went and I laughed when I saw it the first time. I thought, what shenanigans is this? But I opened the article. And guess who is the one that named this new Zulu king? It is Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, Cyril Ramaphosa is from a completely different tribe. He's a Venda, I think, right? So he's got no authority as the president of South Africa to be able to do this. So now, it one of the old Zulus that there are that I think for the Ethiopia, TV, ek kan nie sy naam onthou nie.
Mangosuthu Buthelezi.
Buthelezi said this is totally unlawful and Ramaphosa has no right to appoint a king in Zululand, and there might even be an ethnic conflict that is going to happen between the Zulus because of this. I think so. But if they manage to marry this white woman off to this Zulu king, this new one that was appointed by the president of South Africa, which is totally in conflict with their culture, then it's going to be very bad for us. I think that's going to be very negative for us. So I'm hoping that the Zulus will be, fighting over this.
Yeah, but will they?
I mean, maybe I would like. Actually, I've never spoke TV about this thing. I've wanted to, but things happen. So I actually want to hear his thoughts on it.
Yeah, one of the main things I think that we need to realize is the only thing that currently unifies the black tribes in South Africa. And there's another factor, it's the immigrants from Malawi, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Tanzania, yeah, from Nigeria, especially Nigerians. The one thing that unified the blacks in South Africa, and forget the immigrants for a moment, is their animosity and their hatred towards whites. And that is one thing a lot of people tend to overlook, I think. And I think for tribal wars to happen, something the whites is a common enemy to all of them. So first off, we should be out of the picture. So I don't think personally this will be too much of an upset for them, and it will cause too much problems in the future, I have to tell you. But also I can tell you in South Africa there is a big hatred from the blacks, from the Bantu from South Africa towards the immigrants or the illegal immigrants, especially the Nigerians, because if you ever have met a black or a black Jew, it's a Nigerian. He's a bit smarter than the average black, he's a bit bigger and stronger, and he always run drug trafficking rings. He will always smuggle humans. You will always have prostitution rings. And unfortunately, in South Africa, this is a big evil. They tend to bring in the white women that are from poorer backgrounds that do not have money. They hook them up with drugs, and yeah, they're really the kingpins of the underworld at this moment, and they work very closely with the Jews. So that's a very big problem currently in South Africa. Prostitution.
Imagine my surprise. Sorry,
Yeah,
go
yeah,
on. Go on.
that is and yeah, and actually, I see in Ukraine there was an article about a lot of Nigerians when the war first broke out. A lot of Nigerians, thousands. I think it was something like how much was it? 12 to 20,000, which was repatriated back to Nigeria. And for what purpose were they there? I can only guess. And they said a lot of people afterwards said it was for human trafficking.
Yeah, I have to tell you a funny anecdote from Slovenia. We got a certain sum of Ukraine fugitives lately. But there's one thing all the people from Slovenia have been noticing that these Ukrainian fugitives are, for our purposes, insanely rich. They have supercars and and so forth, and so the narrative of the mainstream conservative party is yeah, and look at them, they learn Slovene so fast and so forth and so forth. And I can't help myself but speculate that these people knew a front that the so-called war is going to happen, and they knew this affront because they're a part of the tribe who organized this whole event, sort of say. So my speculation now is that the majority of this insanely rich Ukrainian fugitives in Slovenia, the majority, there may be some poor Ukrainians coming here, are basically Ukraine Jews. What do you think about this? Fellow
It happened to
whites.
South Africa as well. It happened to South Africa as well before the Second World War. A lot of Jews immigrated to South Africa. And yeah, luckily when the National Party took over, they immediately stopped the immigration of the Jews. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. The National Party in South Africa, uh, in the books and in the records, they were extremely anti-Semitic when they were first founded. So yeah, they were anti-Jewish and Jewish immigration. But that all changed after Hendrik Verwoerd was assassinated. So yeah, I can certainly believe the picture that you have just sketched for me. Immediately, these types will immigrate to your country. Before you know it, they're all rich, and before you know it, they will subvert your economy. They will the native people from Slovenia will get poorer, and they will run literally all the economic businesses that was always in the native people's hands.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with some Slovene libertarian Jews about a famous Slovene economist died, and he was always portrayed by the conservative or libertarians as a some sort of Keynesianist or a socialist because he was skeptical about foreigners privatizing Slovene state companies, and the main narrative from libertarian Jews in Slovenia has always been, as it has been in your country also, probably. I assume that it's better that foreigners come and privatize your state companies that don't have good effects, that don't do well. And there's always been this excuse that it's always communists that grab and steal everything, and the foreigners, it's better for foreigners to come and buy it and manage it as a free trade company of some sort. And they're just belettering him after his death as a socialist and so forth, so forth. Yeah, and go on, guys.
Yeah, in South Africa, certainly a lot of those state institutions that were built up by whites and by the white government, they have fallen into ruin. They don't function if they still exist, and they are being like parceled out and sold off to foreigners. So definitely, there's a continuous like court case going on in South Africa about state capture and how foreigners are able to purchase everything. Johannes already mentioned that the mining the mine owners already own most of the arable land in South Africa, and we consider those mine owners, those Jews, to be foreigners in our land who are occupying our land. And they've got so much influence. For example, if you find if like surveyors come onto your property and they find diamonds under your ground, well, they've got permission to take them out. If you find anything on your land, you can't extract it. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to like these big Jewish corporations. And it's not only the mining sector, our electricity grid. We've taken lots of loans from the Chinese banks. And the Indians have got into the fray as well. They're taking over institutions. We could actually probably do like a whole show just on how our institutions have been hollowed out by capitalism being the economic framework in South Africa.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the mining, this whole question about the mining thing is they changed the law or they amended the act in 1996, so that a farmer only owns the topsoil. And this, in effect, means that whenever they find any minerals on your farm, uh, they will just expropriate it. And they are working to be able to expropriate it without compensation. So if expropriation without compensation does go through, then they will use this as a pretext. And what is interesting for me is that they know that the one thing that will unify the Boers is if they expropriate our farmland outright. So they will never do that. It would actually be very interesting if they were to make that mistake, because then this would unify white people. But for me, we understand that Jews and Chinese and Indians, everybody is exploiting South Africa. And we have to look at and they can do it because they have convinced everybody in the world that South Africa actually belongs to blacks and it's the ancestral homeland of the blacks, right? And then they buy the black politicians and then they are basically free to do with South Africa as they will. Now the only way that we can change our country from being plundered by all of these parasite rats is if it goes to the rightful owners of the land, which is the white people from South Africa. The only way that we achieve this is by first, you know, bringing it into the consciousness of the entire world that actually South Africa belongs to white people and it's the biggest fraudulent theft in almost probably known history that is taking place in South Africa, where they are managing to steal an entire country just by using words and narratives. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, this is an interesting thought from a friend. I came to the empirical conclusion that the apartheid is a natural phenomenon. The black immigrants who come from Africa to Europe by themselves isolated in ghettos and no-go zones. They want to be separated from the whites. I claim that apartheid is a natural sociological phenomenon. This is basically the same as Jared Taylor says about the relations between blacks and whites in America. So if you let them by themselves, they just live their own lives inside their own tribes and races. Are you from the same opinion?
Yeah, I think yes, it's quite natural for the races to generally separate. However, if you note what blacks do when things get like when they ghettoize like Detroit and things become so terrible, the whites are the first to leave. But then you will have blacks leaving as well, and blacks want to move to where whites are. So what, in my opinion, generally whites don't want to hang out with blacks. Maybe the media is trying to convince our daughters, especially, to choose black boyfriends from all the propaganda.
Yeah.
But I think like the sentiment is not enough. You actually need like a law and then law enforcement for the separation. So it's like I think Jared Taylor's position is that in America, people should be able to choose for themselves how to decide who they affiliate with, and it sounds good, but it's sort of like a liberal position. You need something harder than that, and like in Europe, we should just have laws like non-Europeans are denied settlement, and all current non-Europeans, they actually there needs to be a project to send them back, and as soon as possible.
I think the elites, if I can add something, the elites that actually planned this immigrations to Europe, if you look at the average immigrant who arrived in Britain or anywhere in Europe, it's a male, it's a black or brown male, usually 90% young, usually young, more than 30 years. So, yeah, of course, the biggest problem with that is, although naturally they will cluster together with their own, because they're 90% males, they will literally go out and seek women because that's a natural phenomenon. If they do not have women, that's the reason why they seek males. Because, okay, there's two reasons. First off, an army um, for the future, and secondly, they would integrate with us because they have no choice. They can't go set up a community of 90% males. That will, that will be against nature. So yeah, the other problem is South Africa. Because we lived so close to that all our lives and through generations, we know what that is. Even the liberals in South Africa don't want their daughters to marry blacks. Most conservatives will never want. So what is happening in Europe? There is no um, beforehand knowledge of what blacks do, because it's always a homogeneous society. And now all of a sudden, all these males come in, and of course the average European, it's the same as that. They are discriminated, um, feminized. You really believe he's nothing, and because of that, there's these males, black males, seem stronger, and actually because the women do not know what blacks is, they tend erase it easier than in South Africa. So in South Africa, all of our situation changed gravely in the last few years. Race mixing is prevalent nowadays, beforehand was there. I believe in South Africa it took literally hundreds of years before we reach our current point. But in Europe, it will not be like this because there's no forehand knowledge of what tax is. So Europe is in for an elephant. I have to tell you.
Yep. One of the last questions, guys. We can have plenty of these streams. We can have more streams about your situation in South Africa. I would really love to do that. But yeah, one of the last two questions for tonight. The gangs that rob your farms, that attack your farms, did you have any experience with these gangs yourselves? And who are the members of these gangs? Are these gangs some sociological effect, or are these gangs also paid by some malicious, you know, small heads or something like that?
Where I live, it's usually stock theft. In the big towns and cities, it's more organized theft. South Africa against the enormous power, the enormous amount of power. But where I am, it's unorganized. The food guys come in and steal cheap, and they will. Of course, it's not that it's organized in the sense that they will have somebody that come in and pick it up and bring it to the big ghettos who sell it. But it's not that organized. But in the, for instance, when they rob banks and so forth, child smuggling or drug smuggling and prostitution rings and human trafficking. Yes, it's very organized gangs, and the police have no answer to it in South Africa. The one thing you have to realize: the black police don't really use it. Now that is a good thing in a sense because they can enforce any laws on us. For instance, the COVID laws. South Africa have some of the best strictest laws in the world, but the government and officials are useless in enforcing them. So yeah, I hope you feel a bit of idea, but if you're honest, I want to add something.
Okay. Any last
Yes,
words from you guys
I
for
would like
tonight?
to add some. I would actually like to add something to that. That when you say gangs, I assume you how do you say, refer to the people that are committing the four murders.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, it's an interesting thing. So, like David said, yes, there is something uh, of an organized crime, obviously, but there is also organized. Why do I say that? Because you have to look, for instance, myself, our neighbors, when I was a little boy, was killed by a gang of 11 of these non whites. They attacked it was a mother, her sister, and a daughter, and a husband. They tie up the husband and they restrain him, stab him, do all kind of things to immobilize him. They tie him up and force him to watch as they rape and slit the throats of both the two women. The detail in this is very important. You'll understand now. Then they take this little girl, they take her on the kitchen table, they rape her, they crucify her while being alive on the table, and then they skin her alive. And the reason why they are leaving the husband alive is because this is terrorism. They want somebody alive to tell the tale, to enforce a fear to live on the rural countryside, because they want to depopulate the countryside. They want us all to live in the cities. Actually, I don't want to say too much about this because too many people are going to be, very upset when I say it. But there is an initiative being driven by the so called conservative bloc to make a mega city even for our people, you know. And they use this farm murders to drive the fear to get us away from the rural countryside. So, my plight and my goal primarily now is to unify white people and to resettle white people on the countryside, to make a bigger concentration of white people on the countryside, because this country belongs to us and we will not be intimidated. But if we do not change our approaches and our behaviors, then we will go extinct for all intents and purposes. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
Kiwi, one last thought for tonight.
Yeah, one thing I really can add or say to people overseas, you should take it the current situation in South Africa, and we should realize it's coming as well, and that this is the plan. This is what I plan for all of us. Basically, in a few hundred years, do not change our situation. will be too late. We will have lost power everywhere. So it is time at this moment try, try and you should get involved now in the plight of your people because things are only going to deteriorate right from now on in. I'm telling you, in 10 years' time, when we look at it, we will say, why didn't I get involved? Because times will be a lot tougher and wars will be a lot stricter. We are only losing power. We are getting weaker and they are getting stronger. It's time that we should actively get involved and really challenge status quo. I want to thank you, Alice, for having us. We really appreciate
I really appreciate you guys coming here. I hope you won't be strangers in the future, and that will make more of such streams. Thank you for
Thank you.
coming.
Sorry, Alice. I
No, not
also
a
want
problem.
to give my thanks to you and to your listeners, and also I want to reiterate what TV is saying. Please partake in the struggle for your people. Do not be disheartened by the words or actions of our enemies. Our our fight is a sacred one. It is a noble one and it's the most just one that there is. And we must absolutely do this continually. We should work together as white nations around the world to form a big white coalition. International white nationalism is what we need going forward. No longer will we attack each other and our sovereignty in the name of Jewish prosperity and Jewish ambition. The time for white ambition is now. The future is white, and white is the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys, and thank you for all the viewers and listeners. And have a good evening and a good night. Bye.
Goodbye.